The Vindicator drifted into docking alignment, its massive hull gleaming under the cold light of Ralcast Station. A neutral ground in the Orion Arm, the station served as a meeting point for species across the sector, diplomats, traders, and, on rare occasions, militaries seeking to avoid war. Today was one such occasion. Commander Elias Rourke watched the screen as docking clamps extended. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, a face hardened by experience, dark eyes assessing every variable. Behind him, Lieutenant Kara Patel leaned against the holotable, arms crossed. "They're laughing at us already," she murmured, watching the Xelari warships hovering beyond the station. Sleek, predatory vessels, bristling with weapons. "I bet they've got some show planned." "They always do," Rourke said. "Let them think what they want." The docking sequence completed with a dull clank. The airlock hissed open. 2 Xelari officers awaited them, their emerald-green exoskeletons polished to a mirror shine. Admiral Vrax stood in the center, a towering figure draped in ceremonial battle robes. His mandibles curled into what Rourke recognized as amusement. "Ah, the esteemed humans," Vrax said, voice deep and reverberating. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd lost your way." Rourke smiled. "Navigation's one of our strengths." "Is it?" "That's surprising." Vrax turned, gesturing for them to follow. "Come, Commander. We have prepared an exhibition. I believe you will find it educational." The Xelari led them through the station's corridors to an observation deck overlooking a vast training field. Below, Xelari soldiers demonstrated their precision with plasma rifles, striking moving targets at impossible speeds. Every shot landed perfectly. Cheers and hissing applause filled the chamber. Rourke stood with his hands behind his back, silent. Patel shifted uncomfortably beside him. Vrax observed him closely. "Humans value marksmanship, do they not?" "We do. And yet, in battle simulations, your soldiers exhibit abysmal accuracy." The Admiral's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Your reliance on AI targeting is evident. Without it, your species is blind." Rourke didn't react. "Perhaps." Vrax gestured to the training floor. A friendly demonstration, then. A Xelari soldier, easily 7 feet tall, stepped forward, placing a small, hovering drone at 50 meters. He fired, striking it dead center. Applause. More chittering approval. Another Xelari stepped up, this time with a moving target. Again, a perfect hit. Vrax turned to Rourke, mandibles spreading wide in a grin. "Would one of your soldiers care to try?" Rourke looked at Patel. She hesitated, then stepped forward. The Xelari handed her a pulse rifle, configured for manual aim. The target hovered in the distance, shifting unpredictably. Patel raised the weapon, fired, missed. Fired again, another miss. Laughter rippled through the Xelari officers. "Predictable," Vrax chuckled. "Your weapons compensate for your inferior reflexes. Remove that crutch, and you are helpless." Patel lowered the rifle but said nothing. Rourke only smiled. Vrax leaned in. "This is why you will never defeat US in war." Rourke met his gaze. "You assume war is about hitting targets." The Admiral's mandibles twitched, but he said nothing. Moments later, they returned to the negotiation chamber. Ornate metal walls gleamed under artificial lighting. The table was long, polished obsidian. Vrax took his seat at the head, Rourke directly across. Other officers filed in. Vrax steepled his clawed fingers. "The Dominion is willing to allow humanity limited expansion, under our guidance. A protectorate status." Rourke tilted his head. "Meaning we answer to you." "Meaning you survive." Patel stiffened. Rourke remained composed. "And if we decline?" Vrax exhaled, a slow, amused sound. "Then you risk annihilation." A silence settled over the table. Rourke exhaled, sitting back. "Interesting proposal." Vrax's eyes narrowed. "You entertain it?" I entertain everything, Rourke said. That's why we're here, isn't it? Vrax studied him. We are here because war is costly. Because your species, while misguided, has potential. Because I prefer to see an opponent surrender rather than be reduced to ash. Rourke tapped his fingers against the table. A generous offer. But let's be honest, if you truly believed we were no threat, you wouldn't be offering anything at all. A flicker of something passed through Vrax's expression. His mandibles twitched again. Rourke leaned forward. You underestimate us because you don't understand how we fight. That's fine. But I suggest you reconsider your assumptions before we move to a battlefield. The Admiral scoffed. And what battlefield would that be? Rourke smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The one I've already chosen. Vrax's expression darkened. Moments later, the meeting ended. The Vindicator crew returned to their ship. Patel walked alongside Rourke as they moved through the docking corridor. That went well, she muttered. They think we're incompetent. They always do. And we let them, Rourke said. That's what matters. As the Vindicator undocked, Patel glanced at him. So, the battlefield you mentioned. Rourke didn't look at her. His eyes were on the starfield beyond. It's already set. The Vindicator floated in the darkness, surrounded by the void. A lone Terran warship against an approaching fleet. The Xelari formation, 20 ships strong, moved with precision, each vessel a sleek predator, confidence radiating from their tight, calculated maneuvers. On the bridge, Commander Elias Rourke stood with his hands behind his back, watching them close in. Lieutenant Patel worked quietly at her station, tension visible in her shoulders. They're exactly where we want them, she murmured. Rourke nodded. Right on schedule. A flicker of movement in the holodisplay confirmed what he already knew. The Xelari had positioned themselves into a traditional assault wedge, their strongest ships leading the charge, smaller ones sweeping the flanks. A formation designed for overwhelming firepower. Perfect. A communication request blinked on the screen. Patel glanced at him. Incoming transmission. It's Vrax. Let's hear it. The screen shifted to reveal the Xelari Admiral, seated in his command chair, mandibles spread in amusement. Commander Rourke. I commend your bravery. Standing alone against us? A bold, if foolish, choice. Rourke's voice remained calm. We both know how this ends. Indeed, Vrax agreed. Your surrender will be accepted. You have my word that your crew will be treated with dignity. Rourke tilted his head. That's generous of you. But I have a counteroffer. Vrax's mandibles twitched. Do you? Rourke leaned forward slightly. Turn your ships around. Leave this sector. Save yourselves. Laughter erupted from the Xelari bridge officers behind Vrax. The Admiral let it run its course before responding. Ah, Rourke. Ever the optimist. No. We will proceed. The transmission cut. Patel exhaled sharply. That's that. Rourke turned to his crew. Weapons cold. Hold fire. They waited. The Xelari closed the distance. At 30,000 kilometers, the first shots came, brilliant lances of plasma streaking toward the Vindicator. Rourke watched the impact notifications blink across his display. Shields absorbed the blasts, energy dispersing across the hull. Minor damage, Patel reported. Good. Hold. The Xelari continued their barrage. The Vindicator remained motionless, absorbing each hit without returning fire. Patel frowned. Sir, if we don't shoot soon. Not yet. The Xelari closed further, confidence swelling. Another wave of plasma fire slammed into the Vindicator. Rourke waited. Then, at precisely 15,000 kilometers, he gave the order. Activate the grid. Across the void, something unseen stirred. Micro-drones, deployed days ago, powered up in an instant. Invisible to standard scanners, they had waited in silence, lying in the black like unseen predators. Now, they struck. The Xelari ships, still advancing, crossed into the network of hidden explosives, targeting disruptors, and electromagnetic mines. The first detonation sent a shockwave rippling through the lead ship's hull. The second shredded its flanking escort. Within seconds, energy surges flickered across Xelari systems, scrambling sensors and weapons guidance. Panic spread through their fleet. On the bridge of the Vindicator, Patel watched the chaos unfold. "They're breaking formation." Rourke nodded. "Of course they are. They don't even know what hit them." Vrax's voice returned over the comms, no longer amused. "What is this? What have you done?" Rourke answered with a question of his own. "Did you really think we were aiming at your ships?" Silence. Then, an explosion rocked the Xelari formation as another hidden detonation chain activated, catching 3 more vessels in its grasp. Fires blossomed in the void. Vrax's comm facade cracked. "You fight like cowards." Rourke smiled, though there was no humor in it. "No, Admiral. We fight to win." The Xelari scrambled, their precision lost. The Vindicator finally opened fire, not on enemy ships directly, but on space around them. High-velocity rounds struck areas thick with debris from previous battles. The kinetic impacts sent metal fragments spraying into the Xelari fleet at near-relativistic speeds, cutting through shields like paper. The battlefield itself became a weapon. Vrax's ships tried to reposition, but their own momentum worked against them. They had advanced too quickly, too arrogantly, and now, every movement only made their situation worse. A Xelari destroyer, struggling to escape the chaos, collided with an activated drone mine. The explosion shattered its hull, sending debris spiraling into another vessel. A chain reaction followed. Patel let out a breath. "This isn't a battle. It's a massacre." Rourke's expression remained unreadable. "It's a lesson." The Xelari flagship attempted to withdraw, but Rourke was ready. "Deploy the second wave." More drones activated. This time, they jammed propulsion systems, locking Xelari ships in place. With no ability to retreat, they could only watch as the Vindicator lined up its final strike. Fire rail batteries. Titanium slugs, each the size of a small car, tore through the remaining Xelari ships. One by one, their vessels ruptured under the force, breaking apart in silent eruptions. The battle was over before it had truly begun. Vrax, his image flickering on the comms, stared at Rourke with something unfamiliar in his alien gaze. Not anger. Not hatred. Recognition. "You never intended to fight us fairly," he said. Rourke met his gaze. "Fair fights are for fools." The Admiral was silent for a long moment. Then the screen cut to black. Patel exhaled. "What now?" Rourke turned from the display, walking toward the bridge exit. "Now we prepare for what comes next." Because he knew Vrax wasn't done yet. And neither was he. The battle had unfolded like a well-executed plan. Rourke stood at the command chair, his fingers resting lightly on the console. The Vindicator was now surrounded by the wreckage of the Xelari fleet. There were no more weapons fire. No more explosions. Only the slow drift of debris and the sudden quiet that followed the chaos. Lieutenant Patel stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "They're retreating," she said, watching as the remaining Xelari ships, crippled and panicked, attempted to flee the sector. "They won't get far," Rourke murmured. Patel shot him a glance. "You're sure about this?" Rourke turned to her, his expression unreadable. "They've underestimated us for the last time. This isn't just a fight for survival, this is the end of their perception of humanity." The comm system buzzed, a new signal coming through. It was Vrax again. The Xelari Admiral's voice crackled over the speaker, harsh and desperate. "You think you've won, human?" Rourke allowed a hint of a smile to touch his lips. "I think you've realized what you've overlooked." Vrax's mandibles clicked in frustration. You've caused us damage, yes, but it is nothing we cannot recover from. You cannot expect your pathetic ships to hold us off for long. This victory is a delusion. Rourke's tone was cold. No, Admiral. This victory was inevitable. You just failed to recognize it. The transmission was abruptly cut off. Rourke exhaled, turning to face Patel. Prepare for Phase 2. Phase 2? Patel raised an eyebrow, but Rourke's silence was all the answer she needed. The Vindicator hung in the space like a ghost, waiting. Every inch of the warship hummed with quiet purpose. The Xelari had no idea what was coming. Patel glanced at her console, her fingers flying across the keys. Sir, the Xelari flagship, the Verkan, has reactivated its drives. They're making a break for it, heading toward the outer rim. Let them, Rourke said, his voice low and steady. It's exactly what we want. Patel stared at him, confusion furrowing her brow. But that ship is the heart of their remaining fleet. We could finish this now, put them out of their misery. Rourke shook his head. No. The flagship is the bait. We need them to think they can escape. Let them think they've outsmarted us. Patel didn't ask further. She had learned by now that when Rourke said something, it was never without purpose. An hour passed, and Rourke kept his eyes on the displays, waiting. His strategy had already been set in motion. In that time, the Verkan continued its escape, its engines leaving a trail of radiation behind it as it tore through the vast emptiness of space. No other Xelari ships pursued it. They had scattered. But Rourke had prepared a trap that was invisible to the Xelari, masked by the very thing they had mocked about humanity, our reliance on automation. The Vindicator powered down its active sensors, minimizing its signature, becoming a ghost once again. The comm system beeped once more, and this time, it was a full transmission. The Xelari flagship had entered the outer rim of the system, well past the boundary of their former defenses. This is your final warning, Commander Rourke. Frax's voice boomed through the comm. You cannot win. Surrender now, and I will ensure your crew survives. Rourke remained silent for a long moment, his fingers hovering over the console. You have no idea how close you are to extinction, Admiral, he replied, his voice steady, but carrying an edge of finality. The transmission cut off suddenly, followed by a burst of static. Patel looked up sharply. Sir, the Verkan's energy output is spiking. They're preparing something. I know, Rourke muttered. Activate the phase lock disruptor. The Vindicator's cloaking systems hummed into life, rendering the ship invisible. Then, through a series of advanced, near impossible calculations, Rourke had laid the perfect final trap. The Verkan had already crossed into a dead zone of the system, a place where no Xelari ship had ever been before. The flagship was headed straight into the trap. Rourke watched the holodisplay as the Verkan continued its flight, unaware of the invisible minefield closing in around it. Patel adjusted her console, fingers dancing across the keys. All systems are set. We're ready when they enter the kill zone. Rourke's gaze didn't waver. Give them a minute. Patel frowned, glancing at him. We could strike now. Wait. Another few seconds passed. Then, as expected, the Verkan crossed the threshold. The sudden flare of light that erupted from the Xelari flagship's engines was the last thing they would ever see. A series of devastating electromagnetic pulses, combined with a disorienting cascade of kinetic energy waves, tore through the ship's systems. The Verkan's engines sputtered and failed. It was frozen in place. The final phase of Rourke's plan had begun. Before the Xelari flagship could react, a swarm of automated drones, all cloaked and prepared, released a barrage of high-velocity, anti-capital ship projectiles directly into the flagship's exposed underbelly. With the Verkan systems down, the Xelari had no hope of defending themselves. Explosions rocked the flagship as the drones hit, disabling shields and rupturing key structural points. In seconds, the Verkan was a disintegrating husk. Patel's voice was flat, a hint of disbelief creeping in. It's done. Rourke allowed himself the briefest of smiles. Yes. It's done. As the flagship's lights flickered and then faded, Rourke knew it was over. The Xelari, despite their vast superiority, had made one fatal error. They had failed to understand humanity's greatest strength, adaptability. They had expected brute force. They had expected direct confrontation. Instead, they had encountered a species that fought with wit, misdirection, and patience. And that was their downfall. The Vindicator remained in place as the wreckage of the Xelari fleet floated silently in the void. There would be no more threats from the Dominion, not for a long time. Rourke turned to Patel. Prepare a message for the Admiralty. Let them know the Xelari won't be back. Patel nodded. What about Vrax? Rourke's expression hardened. Let's just say, I don't think he'll be coming back either.